before we talk about some Najee Harris news and maybe a couple potential trades for the Pittsburgh Steelers as we move towards OTAs, with a hypothetical that has hit the internet about the Pittsburgh Steelers acquiring DK Metcalf from the Seattle Seahawks that may just be the wildest thing we have ever heard, and I think it's time to react. Nick, let's send it down to you.
John Bueller of Fansided had an interesting mock trade here, and I'll read it out for you guys and let you be the judge. In Bueller's trade scenario, the Steelers add DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks in exchange for a 2025 first-round pick, a 2025 third-round pick, a 2026 second-round pick, a 2026 fourth-round pick, and George Pickens, number one wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So what do you guys think of that? I'll say mock trade and emphasis on the mock.
Emphasis on the mock for sure. I think we should do a whole podcast just staring at the mustache. Phenomenal mustache. Told you before the show. Very thankful that you kept that one for at least a couple days here as we do the podcast. Steven, let's talk to you. What's your thoughts on a wild mock trade there?
Yeah, Nick kept reading off draft pick after draft pick, and honestly, those didn't really bother me as much. DK Metcalf's a good player. You got to give up something to get him. But once you got to George Pickens, I was all the way out. I mean, that completely defeats the purpose of trading for a wide receiver in the first place. I mean, the problem is that the Steelers don't have enough, let's call it starting caliber wide receivers. So trading away one of your only wide receiver with starting experience on the roster. I mean, not the only one, but I'm not sure I consider Van Jefferson or Quez Watkins surefire starters just yet, or really at all. So trading away George Pickens, I think, completely defeats the purpose of this trade at all. You're just in the same spot. Maybe you did upgrade at number one receiver, but you didn't upgrade enough to make up for the fact that you still don't have a number two. You're not sure if you even have a number three, quite honestly. So, this doesn't really make sense at all to me. I mean, and that on top of 4 draft picks, including a first rounder and a second rounder, doesn't make much sense to me. And I don't see any reason why the Steelers would propose this or why they would even think about getting rid of George Pickens at all.
No. I think the line is drawn at George Pickens. I don't think there's any world where the Pittsburgh Steelers go, you know what? Yeah, we're going to get rid of George. We feel good about getting rid of George. That he's the reason we got rid of Deontay, but we're going to get rid of George. We feel really good about that. DK is here for 2 years and then everything's fine. It just makes absolutely literally zero sense. And I get it. DK Metcalf is probably an upgrade over George Pickens, but he's still older. He's 4 times as expensive, and you're going to give up a first, a second, a third, and a fourth to get him over the next 2 years, which is just not a move the Pittsburgh Steelers ever make, let alone for a wide receiver. That's just not in the realm of possibilities. I would say this goes down pretty easily as the wildest trade scenario I have seen of the offseason. And there's been some crazy ones. And there's been some big names. We're talking multiple first-round picks for Brandon Ayuk, maybe a first-round pick for Deebo Samuel. We've talked, quarterbacks. At one point, Justin Fields was going for a first-round pick. We were feeling really, really good about it. Even if you took away everything, even if you said just George Pickens, DK Metcalf straight up, I'd still be like, I just don't think the Steelers would be interested in making that move, just because George Pickens is a lot cheaper. He's younger. And let's not act like George Pickens doesn't have DK Metcalf upside if everything works out in his favor over the next 2 years. Definitely a wild one. Would you rank it the wildest of the offseason?
Probably. I mean, I'm trying to think of something we've talked about that has been even crazier, and I'm sure there was, but I can't think of one that immediately struck me as making less sense for the Steelers than this one.
Yes.
It doesn't solve any of your needs. I think it makes you, I guess, not necessarily worse next year, but you are mortgaging your future for a marginal upgrade at number one wide receiver. You compare their stats from last year. George Pickens had a really good year last year without much help from his quarterback or from his scheme, or from anyone else, really. I mean, he was also doing it when Deontay Johnson was out and he was getting double teamed and triple teamed all the time. To talk about George Pickens having DK Metcalf upside is not ridiculous at all. We all, I think, can see the similarities in play style. George Pickens is good, man, and giving him up straight up for DK Metcalf all by itself still doesn't, like you said, make a ton of sense. And you throw in 4 future draft picks, and it just makes even less sense. It's just the idea that you would throw George Pickens on top of an already insanely generous package of draft picks is completely insane to me. I don't know why. Like Nick just kept going, and I was like, okay, maybe it's still kind of a lot. And then once George Pickens was in there, I was like, oh, you should have started with that. You should have led with that because that would have taken me out immediately.
Yeah. The way I read it when I first read it yesterday, 2 days ago or something like that, George Pickens was the front of this draft trade, and I went, "Oh, okay. There's no point in reading the rest of it. This is fine." But that's where we are. It's wild to see. No, thank you. I mean, the Seattle Seahawks be all over it, but the Pittsburgh Steelers, never a chance. There would never. You couldn't get Omar Khan. You couldn't hold Omar Khan hostage and say he's going to make that trade. Would never happen.
That's the other thing. Like Omar Khan, who famously loves to give up draft picks, like he's the one who's like acquiring them. He's the one who's getting these guys in trade. The idea that he would overpay for a guy like DK Metcalf doesn't make any sense. And that's the thing. This just doesn't even follow like logical steps that the Steelers usually take. This isn't in their character. This isn't something that they do regularly. So I don't know where the kind of gear started turning and where this kind of came from.
No chance.